Well, I hope the day has been enjoyable so far, and thank you to those who presented already. I've enjoyed what I was able to hear, and I know there were good things happening in other rooms. One of these days we'll invent simultaneous location and be able to listen to all the papers. But I'm delighted to be able to welcome you to this evening's session with Michelle Lloyd-Page, a longtime colleague here at Calvin. I was saying to Michelle earlier, I'm teaching a class at Calvin at the moment that has 7 students in it and myself, and we represent 8 different countries. That's one of the things that's changing, is the composition of our student bodies, even at Calvin. And to have a country with 8 people from 8 countries, have a class with 8 people from 8 countries is not typical for Calvin. Calvin traditionally has been more the kind of place where being called Smith makes you a contributor to diversity. One of the things I sort of deeply admire about Michelle is that she has stuck for a long time in diversity work here at an institution where that work has been uphill for much of that tenure. But Michelle's unusual in a number of ways. Michelle is a sociology professor and an ordained minister. I sometimes wonder how many people actually live in the middle of that Venn diagram. She has worked at Calvin for more than 35 years and has been a very significant leader in our attempts to actually do some justice to the diverse nature of God's kingdom in what claims to be a Christian institution of higher education. She's been doing this work for a long time, and just recently, well, not just recently, she's just recently been writing about it, but has gradually become a leader for other institutions as well, and just recently has worked on a book with a colleague, the Diversity Playbook, that has distilled some of her wisdom. And it was just fascinating this afternoon. I was just dipping in and out of reviews and things around the book again, and just seeing how much of the language around the book is talking about love and wisdom and restoration. You can get edified just by reading the recommendations. But an important and useful book on how Christian institutions can approach questions of diversity. Michelle is currently, make sure I get this right, the Executive Associate to the President for Diversity and Inclusion, which must be one of the longer titles on campus, but a pretty important one. And I'm delighted that we're able to give her space at the conference this evening to learn from her. So thank you, Michelle.
Oh, and it's still on. You can go ahead and undo that thing. Well, hi, good evening. How are you all doing? Oh, goodness. Okay, here we go. I want to get my other notes here, but I want to start out first by saying it's just a little intimidating to hear that David Smith has been reading my book. Just a little bit. It just is, because he is brilliant and writes so well in this area. And I think I'm just Michelle, a sociologist who's been hanging around Calvin for quite some time. Just a little quick note, this is my victory lap year. This is what I'm calling it. My victory lap year, because I had announced that I'm going to be retiring. And I tell people I get to retire. I'm not being pushed out. I'm not mad. I'm not upset. It's just that I got a 6-year-old grandchild that lives in California that I want to spend a little bit more time with. And I have another grandchild on the way. So I'm going to do that. But when I started here at Calvin, I was a student, I should say that. So my first 4 years at this institution was that of a student. And when I started here at Calvin, ooh, goodness, less than 2%, that's being real generous, less than 2% of the student body had any melanin in their skin. Just not even a whisper. And now we are at 30% of the student body. Does not call itself white from North America. That's quite an accomplishment, and it seems like it's been a long time, but it's been good. And so I'm going to just share with you, just talk with you a little bit about some thoughts that have come to my mind. I enjoy the title, the theme of this conference, which is Faith and Pedagogy Amid Educational Change. And so having some time to think about that, what would I want to share with you all? Now, I had given the name of the title in advance, but this comes from being a Black preacher. You know, you ask me like a title of a message or a presentation more than 24 hours before I'm going to give it, it's probably going to change. And so the topic that we did have is why you need a diversity playbook, but I am going to take a little bit of liberty to change it to why we need a diversity playbook. Because at Calvin, we have not gotten it 100% right. We've made a lot of progress, but there's yet a lot more that we can do. And if some of you are here and saying, wait a minute, that's not the person that was in the program, you're right. We had to make a little change, and I am appreciative of the accommodations that have been made so that I could make sure that I could be here and not have to serve on jury duty, but here we go. So let's get started. And I should also say, I just want to thank you all for the invitation to be here as well. These last 24 hours have definitely been a test of flexibility and trusting that God knows what God is doing. Lord knows that has just been my life. It's like, God, are you sure about this? And God says, yeah, keep going, keep going. So before we take a minute, we see this, and that just means I wasn't following my own notes, and I advanced the slide 1 second too soon. But I'm going to ask you, if you're able to put your feet flat on the floor, if you would put your feet flat on the floor, and if you would just kind of sit up a little bit, and if you could take your hands and as you're sitting, put them either on the table, palms up, or on your lap, palms up. I have found it very helpful to take a few moments just to breathe deeply. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. I promise nobody is going to take your stuff, but close your eyes, and I just want you to inhale on a count of 4 deeply. 2, 3, 4, hold. 2, 3, 4, and exhale through your mouth slowly. 2, 3, 4. I'm going to invite you to do that again. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, 3, 4, and exhale. 2, 3, 4. One more time. Deeply, deeply breathe in. 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, 3, 4, and exhale. 2, 3, 4. Thank you. One of the things I did during the pandemic, besides write a book, is become a certified wellness coach, and just being more intentional about how to care for myself and how to advise others to care for themselves, and have found that just these moments that we take to take deep breaths and to realize, for at least for me, that every breath that I take is a gift from God. Every single breath that I take is a gift from God. And sometimes just recalling that, so no matter what is going on, even when there's seismic shifts that are going on, changing landscapes that are going on, and these cultural moments that we're not understanding, if we are still breathing, if we can still take a deep breath in and hold it, that's a gift from God. And there is still opportunity for something different and better to happen. In this moment, it is no news to you, and if this was part of the introduction to the whole conference, I apologize for repeating it, but I think it bears repeating. When we look at the moment that we are in right now, when we're looking at war and the rumors of war and the aftermath of war, when we're still dealing with a pandemic, and not just one pandemic, but another pandemic and another pandemic, when we're still trying to figure out what the next impact of the climate change is going to be, the flooding that is happening around our globe seems unnatural more than natural. We see the warming and the deserts and the warms and all those things. When we're thinking of this moment for me as a sociologist, this social moment, this very polarized political moment, and it doesn't matter what country that we're in, we are seeing something happening where that is pulling us apart rather than pulling us together. We think about globalization that is happening and migration that is happening. When we're thinking about economic volatility, what is our currency going to be worth tomorrow, next week? And who is it depending on? Think about government changes. Who's in power? Why are they in power? And why are they in power? There's so much that is going on. So much is going on. And all of this happens in both a local and a global context. It's not just in the US, it's not just in Europe, it's not just on the continent of Africa. It is happening everywhere, and because of globalization, we're all connected. What happens here affects what happens there, what affects what happens there. All this is going on, and as it's going on, it's impacting people. These are not just headlines in the news. These are not just stories or things that we are teaching about or trying to help our students understand or even us trying to understand, but this is impacting our students. People are impacted. And as we think about all of these things, it is so easy to fall into this space of, well, that's no concern of mine because it's not me, or it's not mine. It's not the people that I know. It's not the people that look like me. It's not the people that I care about. That's on another continent. That's in another city. But the reality is, as believers, these things are not an us and them. This is all of us. Quickly, just a couple of points from Scripture as I think about what is informing at least my understanding as a reminder that all of this matters. 1 Corinthians 12 through 24, 12 through 14, and then 25 through the first part of 26. I'm sure is a passages of Scripture that you are familiar with. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slave or free, and all were made to drink of one Spirit. For the body doesn't consist of one member, but many. So that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. And I think sometimes in this, I don't even want to call it conversation or dialogue, but this shouting match that is going on around the world about all that is broken and all that is wrong, trying to find blame and trying to demonize the other, I think we forget that if one part suffers, every part of the body suffers. This thought of every part, to me, points to diversity. If it was just one, there wouldn't be diversity, but there are many parts that is making up one body. And so these many parts leads us to think about, well, what about diversity? How does this all play into it? Well, not surprisingly, many colleges and universities share a common belief that is born of experience, that diversity in their student bodies, faculties, and staff is important for them to fulfill their primary mission of providing a high-quality education. I want to highlight that diversity in their student body, this manyness that is there. That's one of the things, taking this seriously and crafting the framework for which Calvin pursues diversity, equity, and inclusion. We use an inclusive excellence framework. And in that inclusive excellence framework, the benefits of diversity, the goal of diversity and inclusion is tied to the mission of the university. As far as I am concerned, we cannot be an academically excellent institution without paying attention to diversity. They go hand in hand. And so as we are more and more colleges and universities are recognizing that they need to pay attention to diversity. Hopefully it's not just a reaction, if we're talking specifically within the United States, it's not a reaction to the summer of 2020 and the racial uprising in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. But you know what? In too many of our institutions, that's when a chief diversity officer was appointed. That's when someone got elevated and said, hey, can you do something about this? Around the world in a different context, what were those crisis moments that prompted your institutions to say, hey, we need to do something about diversity? That's not a bad way to do it, but it's not the best way to do it. Because if it's in a crisis moment and you appoint a person to take care of it, then all the burden is on that person to take care of it. And as soon as the noise dies down a little bit, then it's back to business as usual. I've seen that. I've talked to many colleagues over the past couple of years where they felt so celebrated in stepping into a position, and then 3 months later, I got to get out of here. They're not serious about this. But this experience, this desire for diversity in student bodies and faculties and staff, understanding that it's important for them to fulfill the primary mission. And what is the primary mission? It's a high quality education. This high quality education within a Christian context is helping our students to understand who they are, helping them to understand their purpose in the world, and helping them to love God and to love others. That is our high calling as Christian institutions. Well, I have a news flash for you. So this importance about diversity. Diversity isn't here. Diversity isn't just here. It's also coming. For some, it seems like it's a long way away. But for others, it's like, what next level of diversity is coming? But what do we mean by diversity? As David had said, that I get calls every semester from an institution reaching out saying, Michelle, we're wanting to advance our work in diversity. Can you help us? The first question I ask is, what do you mean by diversity? What is it that you want to address? What is it that you're trying to do? Because their answer matters to me. Now, I'm going to just spend a little bit of time with this because I'm going to assume that you all know all of this, but in case you need a reminder, because it's after dinner and the lights are kind of low, I'm just going to just give a brief overview. So what do we mean by diversity? What am I looking for when somebody calls me and says, hey, can you help us with our diversity efforts? Well, we know diversity can be used to describe individual differences, right? How one person is different from another. It could be their personality, their learning styles, their life experience. That's one way of understanding diversity. Usually that's not what someone is calling me about. Hey, can you help us with this person? It's usually more about, hey, we're thinking more in terms of these group and social differences. We're thinking about these social categories, be it race and ethnicity, or gender, or class, sexual orientation, nationality, or ability, all of these different ways in which we can be different from one another as a social category, as a group. But when people use the term diversity, I have to keep my ears alert to what people are saying and not saying. Because as a sociologist, that's my academic background, I'm thinking about all the ways in which people understand diversity and use the word incorrectly, but that's a whole nother term. Oftentimes, when people are asking me about diversity, they're asking about compositional diversity. Compositional diversity is just we're counting how many are in this group, how many are in this group, how many are in this group. And if I'm feeling particularly tired or snarky in the moment, and they say, how can we improve our compositional diversity? I just say, pay people more. You're supposed to laugh at that. Okay. Pay people more. I said, I guarantee you pay me $1 million in advance, deposited it in my account, I will come work for your institution for a year. Because that's how much it would take for me to leave Calvin, except on point of retirement, right? Give out more scholarships to your students, right? You can, most people have a price that would get them to move or go somewhere. So you know how to fix compositional diversity. You just don't want to pay the money, right? And some of you just need a reality check about where your institution is. I'm just saying, it's not that Grand Rapids is this wonderful place to be. We struggle getting people to come to Grand Rapids. But some places, is anyone here from Houghton University in here? No? Good, I can say that. You could not get me to go to Houghton because it is literally in the middle of nowhere, with a gas station and a pizza parlor, and I am vegan, so that's not going to work. So there's compositional diversity, right? But there's also interactional diversity, and I would want people to move from this focus just on compositional diversity, because if your institution hangs around a couple of more decades, the compositional diversity is going to come, or your institution is not going to be here anymore. That's the reality of the times that we are living in. But what is it like to be at the institution? Is there interaction? Is there inclusion that is there? That is so important. If it's not there, then you've done a whole lot of work to bring people to your campus, and they're not going to stay. Or they're miserable staying. As one session I was in today, they'll leave your institution as haters, as opposed to leaving your institution as being grateful for being at the institution, even for all the good work that you are doing. And then there is structural diversity, and this is the hardest thing to do. This is the hardest step. Because interactional diversity, people just think, well, we need to teach faculty not to say this, and we need to teach these students not to say that to the others, so we'll be kind to one another. We need to exhibit the fruit of the spirits, and this will be wonderful. Fruit of this, you know what I'm trying to say. But that's not enough for real change to happen. That's just called being polite. And you can tell when you're someplace where it's just polite, and where you're really welcomed and involved and have opportunities to become engaged. This interactional diversity could feel like simply tolerance. Like, you should be glad that you are here. Look what we are doing for you. And your faculty, your staff, and your students will not feel like it's their institution. It's your institution. I'm just here for the scholarship. And then I'm out the door. Structural diversity means that where the decisions are really made, that there's diversity around the table. And notice I said where the decisions are really made, at the board level, at the executive level, and all the other places where there are key players who are making decisions, who's around the table to speak into that. So that's all about structural diversity. And just defining diversity. So what I'm looking for when someone is calling me is, are they even thinking about interactional diversity or structural diversity? If they're not thinking about structural diversity, usually my answer is no. Sorry, I got some other people I can recommend to you. And I say no because I don't think they're serious about doing the work. And I don't know about you. Well, yeah, I know about me. I'm too close to retirement to just play around. just too close. And while it would be easy and profitable to say, yeah, I'll come to your campus and do that for $5,000. That's not my going rate. It's actually $50,000, but nobody ever pays that, so I have to settle for something that's a lot less. One day. So it's like, yes. But if they're not serious about doing the work, that's just like throwing seeds among the hard ground or on the sidewalk. And there are too many places who want to do this work. So it's about being strategic. And it's not just about this for other places. I'll tell you a little story, because there's probably going to be all kinds of stories about me when I leave this place. But early in my career, before, it's not wise, but before I was tenured, there was this creation, what was called the Multicultural Affairs Committee. And I was asked if I would be a part of that committee. I was a young faculty member, was not tenured, wasn't thinking I was going to be here that long anyway. And I said no, but I said no this way. I don't feel like being window dressing, and I don't think you're serious about this. So when you're serious about this, then we can talk. Yeah. You could hear crickets after I sent the letter. But they didn't ask me for a long time afterwards. And they didn't ask me again until we created something here that was called the From Every Nation document, which is an anti-racist statement. Being anti-racist means that you're going to look at structural barriers as well. And then I said yes. And then I said yes to more leadership positions because I felt this institution was ready to do the work. And that wasn't just window dressing, that here's a Black person. Let's put her in this role so it can look like we're doing something. I've seen that happen too many times, and y'all ain't gonna take me out that way. You're just not. If you're serious about the work, I'm willing to do the work. I'm willing to be bruised. I'm willing to be tired. I'm willing to be exhausted. But if you're not willing to do the work and you're not paying me that $1 million, it's not about the money, but a person is worthy of their hire. And if you think about, and I'm getting ahead of myself and I'm getting all off my notes, but that is just important. So one of the questions I ask when people ask me, can you help us with our diversity efforts? It's not an automatic yes, even though this is my passion, because I want to know that somebody is serious about this. And in reality, if they're serious about it, I'll do it for a good vegan dinner. I'll do it for a halfway decent vegan dinner, because I care so much about it. But if it's just iceberg lettuce and a tomato, I'm not gonna do it. So here we go. So why is this, what's the big deal, right? Diversity is here, it is coming. Diversity is both a gift and a challenge, and if you've ever tried to do anything to advance the work of diversity, anytime you bring difference together, it doesn't mean that, woo, everything is fun. You bring differences together, you're going to find out the reality of why differences matter to some people, right? So what's the big deal? It's a big deal on moral, biblical, and theological convictions. As I said, what shapes my understanding is the word. What does God's word say about this? And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but what's our moral, biblical, and theological convictions? If we as Christian institutions are only interested in moving this direction is because we see a demographic shift that is happening, our student body is changing, that's not enough. You have to have this grounded conviction, because when it gets hard, you're going to need this strong biblical conviction to hang in there. If it's only about what's going on in the culture around us, you will abandon ship when it gets hard. The numbers do matter. Why is this a big deal? Demographics are shifting. Growing diversity, migration, the services that we need to provide to match the growing diversity, location, partners, if we have a growing diverse student body, a growing international student body or desire for that, and if you don't have the representation in your faculty and staff, you need some community or global partners so that the students can see someone who looks like them, and so that the leadership and the faculty can have a point of view that's different from their own point of view. Talent recruitment and retention. Productivity and effectiveness and performance research has shown that diversity, when leveraged, not just you have compositional diversity and you don't do anything with it, but when you have diversity and you're leveraging it, there is inclusion, there is equity. It increases productivity, effectiveness, and performance for all. It's so much better for the institution. Legal accreditation, compliance, and mandates. Sometimes, at least in the United States, when you're looking for a grant, they're going to ask you about the diversity numbers and what you're doing. If you're looking for accreditation, they're going to be asking you, how are you addressing your student population, the diversity that is there? Compliance, mandates, all of this. This is why it is such a big deal. Social justice responsibility, especially in a broken world, for all the things that we have named that is changing the landscape. How many of your institutions have something in your mission statement that says you are trying to shape a generation of believers to make an impact in the world, to be transformative people of God in the world? Can't transform the world if they don't know what the world is like. Can't transform the world if they can't recognize the differences that are in the world and the ways in which the world is broken. Global citizenship and leadership. And then finally, alignment with mission, vision, and image. Is there alignment between who you say you want to be and what your surrounding community or the world sees when they look at you? One quick thing, easy test. Again, when someone calls and says, can you help? First thing I do is go to their website. Besides, ask them, what do you mean by diversity? Then I go to their website because they can sell me a story. We're so interested. This is so important to us. Then I go to their website and I put diversity in the search. You should do that for your institution. Put diversity in the search and see what happens. If it's a story from 5 years ago, you're in trouble. So, I'm not going to just keep beating you all up, but here we go. So, why is this so hard? If this is important, why is this so hard? Well, part of it is some of the myths that surround diversity. That diversity, myth number one, so we're going to do a little myth busting, is that diversity is just about political correctness. It's so much more than that. That diversity is only about underrepresented groups. One of the most fun that I had when I was teaching in the classroom, teaching about diversity, is to ask students to write about their racialized lives. Just write a little story about your racialized lives. We're here at Calvin, in the land of the Vanders something. And it would happen every time. The people who had been kissed by the sun would be starting, write something. And then I'd see all the white people like looking around like, what are we supposed to do? And then before I would ask for responses, I would say something like, I've noticed that some of you didn't seem like you had too much to write. You might be thinking that you haven't had a racialized experience because you grew up, name the predominantly or all-white community that's nearby, and you went to Christian school, and you did all of this. I bet your church is probably all white, blah, 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 blah. And you'd see the head shaking, and it's like, that must be so cool to be in a community where everybody looks like you, where all the norms are like what you are used to. I have no idea what that's like. No idea what that's like. Your being able to live in an all-white environment, again, looking at the US context, an all-white environment where all the norms reflect things that you are used to, that's a racialized experience. And then you see the squirming happen, right? But it's a reality. So it's not just about underrepresented groups, it's about all of us. It's not about focusing just on individual differences. It's not about some action, some laws, some legislation that happened so many years ago, and now there's a level playing field. It's not true that there are so many cultures in the world that we can't possibly learn or understand them all. It's also not just about, well, look at me, I'm a Black woman, so my ethnicity should be enough to understand about diversity. It's not. I am the first one to sign up for continuing professional development and training when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm the Chief Diversity Officer here at the university. If I'm not putting myself in a position to continue to learn, then I'm not doing my job. Right? And one other cute story, we used to have a cross-cultural engagement requirement here. It looks a little bit different, but for student graduation, students had to take a course that satisfied the cross-cultural engagement requirement. My youngest son came here, and I made him take a CCE course in his first semester here. I didn't teach the course, it was someone else. And then when some students would come to me and say, I don't think I should have to take this because of such and such, I said, you know what? My Black son was raised in a Black community, went to an all-Black school, has an all-Black family, and guess what? He had to take it. You're going to have to take it, right? So, yeah, I think they were glad when I was no longer in charge of the CCE. Here we go. So diversity is not enough. So we talked about diversity, some of the diversity myths, but I want to share with you, just from a biblical perspective, why I think that diversity alone is not enough. I believe that God calls us to more than just celebrate diversity, more than just have a Revelation 7:9 vision. I believe there is so much more. And this so much more for me looks like, and I won't go into a lot of detail, but I will highlight it. It looks like inclusion. As we read in Ephesians 2, 13 and 14. It looks like competence. It looks like competence, knowing how to interact with one another. I'm inspired by 1 Corinthians 9, 20 through 22, among other verses that talk about, it's not just about people gathering together, but it's about bringing people in. It's about inclusion. It's about competence. It's about cultural humility, not thinking that we know how to do something, but we enter in with a posture of humility to really listen and learn from someone who looks different than us, who might behave a little bit different than us, who might see the world a little different than us, who might navigate this world a little bit differently than us. And you got to have a want to. That's not a technical sociology term, but that is one that I have come to appreciate. For example, when people tell me they can't be vegan, it's like, no, you don't want to be vegan. You can be, you just don't want to be. And you have to have a want to do this work, because this is hard work. The work of diversity, like I said, throw enough money at it, you can do it. Move a location, you can do it. Start a satellite campus, you can do it, right? You can use all those numbers to enhance your diversity numbers. But that work of inclusion, that work of equity, oh, that's much harder. And in order to do it, you got to have a want to. Because when you stand up and say, this is the direction that you're going to go in, you're going to have all kinds of people standing up to say, this is why we can't do it, why we shouldn't do it. And in the climate that we're in now, there's going to be a handful of people saying you have drunk the woke Kool-Aid. Additionally, it takes investment and it takes intentionality. We have to count the costs and be willing to pay the price. In the same way, Jesus counted the costs of what it was going to take to win our salvation and to redeem us, but he did it anyway. And so, diversity is not enough. I think God is calling us, our schools, the way that we teach, to be more than just about the numbers. But we can't get past the numbers, can't get past the compositional diversity until we take a look at how are we engaging the diversity that we do have. How are we talking about the diversity that we want to have? How we engage diversity impacts our teaching and our pedagogy, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. Our students experience it within the community, because sometimes it's not enough for what happens in the classroom, what happens in the dorm, what happens in the dining hall. Sometimes it's what happens when they step off of the campus. What is their interaction with the police like? What is their interaction like when they go to the stores? Can they find the things that make them feel at home? Is there a church or a worship service that makes them feel at home, that speaks their heart language? Or does that fall under the category, you should be glad that you're here? All of that matters. Well, let's put a finer tooth comb on it. We also need to think about equity, and we also need to think about persistence. So when we have this idea, we keep pushing forward. We don't stop when it gets hard. We do not lose heart. Though it looks like for all our good efforts, things just aren't going the right way. If we have put our trust in God and we really are striving to do the best that we can, we're coming to conferences like this, we're gaining wisdom and insights from thought leaders and people who've been down that road before. We just keep going, trusting that God is going to bring about the fruit that we so earnestly desire. That's one of the things that has helped me to be at Calvin. You had said 35 years. I'm going to count all 37 and a half years that I have been at this institution. Right? It's persistence, unintentional longevity. But it was longevity because I kept asking God, is it time yet? And God kept saying, no, it's not time. Keep going. And when I would say it's hard, God would say, but my grace is sufficient. And I would say, are you sure about that? God would always say yes. So diversity is not enough. It takes inclusion, competence, cultural humility, a want to, investment, intentionality, equity, and persistence. This is what it takes to get beyond compositional diversity, to get beyond the great pictures for the website or the brochure. This is what it takes. And as we are thinking about diversity, we need to ask ourselves, what happens if we get it wrong? And also ask ourselves, what happens if we get it right? This is a chart that I like playing around with, but when we think about what happens when we get it wrong, this is the first half, the top half of this diagram. If we get it wrong, we need to think about what happens internally, what happens inside of our institutions. If we get it wrong, what happens externally? How is our institution viewed? How are we hampered? What's our Christian witness look like when we get it wrong? But what happens if we get it right? And I'm a firm believer in celebrating every little victory. Every little victory, celebrate it. If you just wait till it's all said and done, Jesus will be back and we'll be having tea and crumpets with Jesus. Right? What happens when we get it right internally? What does it feel like to be on our campuses? What happens when we get it right externally? How do people see our universities? When we get it right, it's going to be hard. We will all have the waiting list we're desiring when we get it right. But it takes persistence. When we get it wrong, our students of color or whatever group is your marginalized group on your campus are more likely to experience racism, discrimination, cyberbullying, verbal and physical assaults, microaggressions on their campuses and with the surrounding community, all of which are damaging to their mental health. We see mental health at an all-time high, or concerns about mental health at an all-time high on our campuses, partly from the isolation that stemmed from COVID and some of the uncertainty that was there. But even without that, when you are one of a handful, or not many that look like you, they're experiencing microaggressions even if they're not telling you. They are experiencing discrimination even if they are not telling you. Just because your students might be volunteering to be on this committee or smiling, that doesn't mean that all is well. And you usually hear about it on their exit interview or when you ask them after they've graduated to contribute to your alumni fund. These experiences lead to alienation, isolation, marginalization, loneliness, further compounding the negative impact on mental health. These are just some stories that have been present, the invisible labor of BIPOC students. You get a handful of students, they're always the ones that are being asked to be on a panel, a committee, or to talk or to give the tour guides. And usually they're not paid for it. I'm just going to put that plug in it, right? It just comes out of their hide. Asking the question, am I really welcome here? And campus climates often show when we do them, and people feel safe in answering honestly, that many are not feeling like they belong. That's not everyone, many do, but we need to be concerned about the ones who don't feel welcome. How we engage diversity matters. I would argue that all these little diagrams could be said to represent diversity. But what does it feel like? We have inclusion, which is kind of the gold standard at the top, where it's all mixed together and everyone has this kind of feeling of belonging and inclusion and all that. But exclusion, we still have all the different colored dots that are there. Just some feel like they're on the outside. We have segregation. This is when we have this little satellite campus someplace else. It's that dorm over there. It's that program over there. That's segregation. Or integration, they're brought inside the community, but still they're in this little place kind of isolated to themselves. How we engage diversity matters. Sometimes in this engagement of diversity, if some of you are familiar with the Intercultural Development Inventory, these little themes will sound familiar. The denial, polarization, minimization, acceptance. Denial is when you just miss differences. You don't understand the significance of difference. It's like, we are all the same. We are all brothers and sisters in Christ. Don't really recognize that my navigation of what it means to be a female Christian might be very different than David's navigation as a male Christian. There are some churches that I can go to where they would readily accept David into the pulpit, but they wouldn't accept me in the pulpit, and I've been preaching for 35 years. Polarization is like, hey, I'm noticing the differences, but whoa, I don't know about that. It's an us, them. Either my way is so much better, an over-romanticizing of my culture and the way that I do things and a demonization of other cultures and the way they do things, or the opposite. I have had some students tell me, oh, I just wish I was Black. It would just be so cool. You can wear your hair in braids. You don't have to worry about getting a tan. Yes, I really have had students say that. Got cool clothes, all that. Just have a much better culture. It's like, yeah, but you want everything but the struggle. Everything but the struggle. An over-romanticizing of the other. It's an exoticizing of the other and being overly critical of your own identity. Minimization is just saying, wait a minute, it's us and them. I'm just going to focus on what we have in common. We're all in this together. We're going to focus on what we have in common. We're not going to talk about the hard stuff. We're not going to look at it. Nope, 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 nope. Acceptance is like, wait a minute. I've been focusing only on and paying attention on what we have in common. I realize that differences are important too. So I'm going to lean in and really try to understand differences. I'm really going to try to understand my own culture, my own identity, and just in learning, find ways of making better connections. And adaptation is actually putting it into practice. Adaptation is saying, you know what, I've done the work of understanding myself and my own culture, and I'm comfortable with the good and the bad. I've done the work of trying to learn from other cultures and learn about them, and I'm comfortable. And if necessary and appropriate and authentically, I can be a bridge builder. It's key to understand being appropriate and being authentic. I have had, oh goodness, yes, I have had students, I hear them in the hallway and they have this wonderful Midwestern, Michigan sound to them, very white Midwestern, you know what I'm trying to say. But when they're having a conversation with me, somehow they've developed this kind of what they would call this urban ghetto kind of accent, Ebonics. That's not authentic. That's not who you are. Now, if you're a white kid and you grew up on the south side of Chicago, that's just how you sound, and you'll sound like that all the time. I don't have no problem with that. But all of a sudden, you're going to try to, no. So how we engage diversity matters. Very quickly, you've probably seen something like this. If you have not, if you have a international population, and even if there's just different regions of the country that are in your particular section, I would highly recommend this book called The Culture Map. And this book called The Culture Map looks at 8 distinct cultural distinctions. These distinctions and how do we communicate? How do we persuade? What does trusting look like? What does it take to trust? Evaluating, disagreeing, deciding, leading, scheduling. Because cross-cultural, multicultural diversity can look at just the way we engage one another. I just had the President's Cabinet take the culture map. You can go to her website, Erin Meyer, you can go to her website, do a team assessment. We did a team assessment, and what we found out, we have a very new president, that in terms of trusting, our president I think he is off the chart on task-based, and almost all the rest of cabinet is on relationship. That was an aha moment for us. It doesn't mean that we have to change, but it helps us to understand how do we engage and how do we build trust with one another, right? So these kinds of cultural dimensions. And then one more, how we engage matters. This might sound a little bit more familiar to you. It's based on Hofstede's and some others, but how do we think about, are we more individually focused or teamwork focused? Are we more expressive or introverted? Coming to chapel here, when I first got here, that was an experience because I was used to a very expressive, I found a new term when I came, expressive or emotive worship, right? This is the land of the frozen chosen, right? At least when I first got here. You know, and I would feel so bad when there was a guest preacher, and I would be like, oh, that is so awesome. Oh, nobody else is clapping. Okay. And I would always go up to them afterwards. It's like, man, woman, you should come to my church. We would have given you a standing ovation for that one. We would have just been clapping and shouting and speaking back to you. And sometimes they would say, yeah, I should come to your church. And sometimes they were just like, Thank you. All right, because they're not used to that. But again, all these different ways, how does this show up? When difference is present, it's not just the skin. We're also bringing with us culture. And culture can manifest itself in so many different ways. How do these things show up in our classrooms? What's appropriate for engagement? If we're not varying our pedagogy, we're leaving people out. We are othering people, and we're wondering why people don't feel like they belong. So if it is important to you, you will find a way. If not, you will find an excuse. So the question is, are you finding a way, or are you finding an excuse? If creating an environment where all can flourish matters, if it matters to you, then you probably need a playbook. What is a playbook? Well, a playbook is where you talk about roles, what people do. You talk about plays, about what are the things that people can do. And then you figure out what's the strategy to get it done, right? So you have the roles, the things that can be done. You have the strategies, which is the game plan, and that creates your playbook. That's what my friend, Michelle Williams, and I tried to create. Not an exhaustive one, because an exhaustive one would be impossible to write, right? Because we haven't lived enough into that reality in order to create it. But this diversity playbook, a shameless promotion as well as a way forward. Diversity playbook, recommendations and guidance for Christian organizations, 3 sections. Section 1 is wisdom for the diversity professional, for the person who is trying to do this work. When Michelle and I started this book, that's the only thing we wanted to write about, because she and I both came with over 20 years experience doing this work. And we know what it's like to do this, and we wanted to let the newer diversity professional know they weren't crazy. These are some things that you need to watch out for. And here's how we were able to get it done. We're going to give you the Cliff Notes version of how to get this work done. The middle section was one that we grew in our excitement about writing. And this middle section is called Guidance for Outliers, Allies, and Co-Conspirators. This is for the people who say they want to help the diversity professional. Because she and I both knew and quickly understood that not all help is help. And so let us help you understand, person who wants to walk alongside the diversity professional or the person who's leading the efforts in the work. This is what it looks like to be an ally. This is what it looks like to be a friend. And sometimes what I need in my life is not a co-conspirator on campus. It's nice to have David, but sometimes in my life, I just need a friend. I just need my best friend. Because my best friend and I, what we do sometimes is we just watch Godzilla movies. Don't judge, don't judge. I say it in the book as well. Because it has nothing to do with higher education. It has nothing to do with diversity. The laws of physics don't work in the old Godzilla movies, because those are the only ones that I really like. The old ones, like from 1956, right? That's the Godzilla movie. That's my go-to one that I like to watch. Sometimes I just need to go someplace and not talk about diversity, because I need to refill my tanks. And I need to remember that I'm still Michelle, not just a diversity professional. And then the third section is strengthening diversity throughout your organization. How can the organization do better? What are some of the strategies? And so with the organization, we talked about, what does it mean to have a shared commitment? What does it mean to sustain that commitment? And how can you go about shifting the culture? And we have this diagram that we included, and very briefly, you can get the book and unpack it all together, but very briefly, it's understanding that this work of shifting culture happens not in a vacuum or doesn't happen in a vacuum. We have to always remember the mission of our institution. Primarily, Calvin University is an educational institution. Calvin University equips students to think deeply, act justly, and to live wholeheartedly as Christ's agents of renewal in the world. That's mission. What is the mission of your organization? It's probably higher education because you're here, right? We also have to think of our context. Where are you? Calvin's context, we are the University of the Christian Reformed Church North America. We are in Grand Rapids, Michigan. That matters in how we do our work. We also have to think about the inward tensions and the outward tensions. What's pushing in and what's pushing from within out and what's pushing out in. And then when we have an understanding of all this, we can begin to shift. We begin with seeing what is actually going on, seeing things the way they really are, not just the way that we want them to be. We heighten awareness about the tensions and the problem spots that we see, as well as the good things that we see. We identify what needs to be done. If there's a gap, if there's a tension, we identify what needs to be done. And then the facilitate, we actually do what we identify. How many of you have ever been in a place where you created a strategic plan, and in year one there was all kind of excitement, it went on a shelf, and then year 4 or year 5, whenever the end of it was, you pulled it back out again. It's like, oh, we were supposed to do that. We need to actually do it. You'll notice that there is an asterisk with the facilitate and the see, because what we facilitate has to line up with what we see. If there's a mismatch between what you're trying to solve and what you actually see as the problem, there's going to be a whole lot of frustration. And then T is the transformation that happens. And then you see it's just a continuing cycle, because once you begin transforming, you'll see more and more that needs to be done. Almost last slide, but here we go. I'm going to put this all up here because you got your cameras out and you're taking pictures, so I'll do it this way. It's also in the book. Why diversity efforts fail. When we're working towards diversity, working towards inclusion, working towards equity, why do they fail? If there's no support from senior leadership, you can still do it, but it's very hard. But if there's no support, people leave. If there's an inability to translate the vision for diversity throughout the organization, the people who clean your buildings need to also catch the vision for why diversity matters, not just the executive leadership. A lack of understanding of how institutional culture changes and operates, like the real way, not just the faculty handbook and the staff handbook, but really how things changes. Who needs to be on your team in order for change to happen? Who do you need to win over? Insufficient financial, human, technical, and symbolic resources. Got a mandate and no resources to do it. Someone has a title and they have no resources to do it. It's not going to get very far. Cognitive strain versus cognitive ease. A lack of a comprehensive framework, a symbolic statement but no action plan. Failure to measure both inputs and outputs. Failure to establish accountability if no one is responsible. Fear of change and a desire to hold on to what has always been because it's familiar and comfortable. And a lack of urgency or desire to wait until there's a critical mass or an outcry or incident. Again, because it takes a lot of work. So as we are looking at our pedagogy and how to change the culture in our classroom, if we are looking at our campuses and how do we change the culture on our campus, changing the culture with regards to diversity is necessary because of the seismic shifts that are happening all around us. You have, no matter the racial composition, the ethnic composition on your campus, you have diversity. If you have more than 2 people, you have diversity. The question is, are you leveraging the diversity And do you have the kind of diversity that you want? If you say no, you need a diversity playbook. And if you're looking for one, I actually happen to know a pretty good one. So diverse, our tagline is, what's your next play? Well, that was interesting. Our tagline is, what's your next play? Because we should always be thinking, what more can we do? We can accomplish a lot, but there's always something more we can do. So that's Michelle and Michelle. It drove our publishers crazy in how to address us. But anyway, we said, anyway. Questions, anything? Thank you. There's microphones to the side, or if you might want to maybe talk to someone at your table for a moment and just, what's one takeaway? Maybe that's the place that, either one takeaway or one question that you have. Just turn to someone. Yeah, really, turn to someone. You got a question? Let's have it.
I'm gonna give this to Sister who's doing the work that you're doing at Bellevue. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. You got it. I was planning on somebody to ask, so I could do the Oprah, you get a book. Okay. I don't have one for everybody, though. Oh, I should say this. If you contact the publisher, it's Abilene Christian Press. If you contact, if there's a group of you on your campus and you want to order a number of books, if you contact them, they will give you a discount for a group purchase. I need to remember to say that as well. If someone else has a question, I'm willing to take that as well. Question, observation.
So I have an oddball question.
Okay.
I'm from Bethel University.
Mm-hmm.
We have consciously never had a campus chaplain. And one of the ideas is every faculty member, every staff member is to be a mentor, if possible, a spiritual mentor. We have a very high level of spiritual mentor.
Mm-hmm.
As I think about that, in your experience, has there ever been success working toward genuine diversity without a diversity office or without a diversity officer? No. And that's what the answer I would expect.
Yeah, because then it becomes, it's everybody's responsibility. And if it's everybody's responsibility, there's a lack of accountability. And there might not be a plan, right? So that's what I talk about, a comprehensive framework, or how do we get there? One of the things that we've been able, for whatever success we've had at Calvin, we've had that success because we've had a plan on how are we going to get there. Just even, what's a common definition of diversity? What do we mean? What are we trying to achieve? So for us, because we had something called the From Every Nation document, we knew that what we were talking about is a systemic definition, right? A structural definition of how do we get there, which meant now we need to look for barriers, and now someone has to be in a position to make some changes. That being said, if there is not a chief diversity officer kind of person, but the president and the board are all on board and they are holding people accountable, it might be possible. But if there's not that level of accountability, and let me give you an example of the day my heart rejoiced. Our immediate past president, he's the one that created this role, this position that I have. That wasn't the day my heart rejoiced. I didn't know that I was even going to apply for this position when we were talking about what it would look like here. But when he told me that every member of his cabinet, so all the leaders of all the divisions, have to have diversity goals within their performance reviews. They had to have diversity goals for them personally, as well as for their division. And that this role, my role, was to walk with them. So I meet monthly with them every month to check in on them, see how they're doing. We have a curriculum that we work through. And then my job was to report back to the president how they were doing. And so there was that accountability that was built in. And so it was no longer, yeah, that's a good thing. We should pray over that. And we welcome everybody. We love everybody. But when it comes like, look, I'm looking at now evaluating you on your performance. And this is a part of how you're being evaluated. So I would say that it would be very difficult. You can have multiple people because here we have a decentralized leading of diversity efforts. I would be the most senior one, but all things diversity do not flow through me. And that is intentional because that responsibility needs to be spread out. It's a good question, thank you. And for $500,000, I'll give you all a discount, $500,000. Anyone else? Yes.
Just because I remember some of the early days when Calvin University was trying to work on issues of diversity. And there was a point at which, in the 1980s, I think it was, where everybody admitted it wasn't working. What we were doing was not working. And there was this great sense that we're failing. Is it useful for people to admit failure?
Yes. Yeah. It's hard to admit failure, but I would say it's important to admit where it's not working, to see where it's not working, and to be honest about that it's not working and where it's not working. Because otherwise we'll look for what is working and only focus on that or think that that's the whole experience. But it's very important, and that's why it is helpful to have an outside auditor come in, even if you have a chief diversity officer on your campus, to bring in an outside auditor to do a review of what you're doing. For some reason, institutions will listen more to an outside auditor than someone who is on the inside. Plus, when someone from the outside is coming in, the person who is on the inside, who is trying to lead those efforts, can say, it wasn't me, it was the outside evaluators that were coming in. But it also helps to provide support for the person who is there, because more likely than not, what the evaluator or auditor will find is the very same thing that the person who is trying to lead efforts has been saying, but hasn't been taken. The sense of urgency with that person's voice isn't being taken as much as it is with someone from the outside coming in and saying that. But yeah, it's very important. I would say admitting where you get it wrong, like that 2x2 little grid that I had, right? Really talking about, we might think that we're doing well, that's good, but where might we be getting it wrong, and what's the cost of that? What is that really costing us when we get this thing wrong? But not live there, not stay stuck there, but to use that as energy to say, we're going to take one step or one giant step, one big leap ahead, but we're going to learn from what we're not getting right. So we're going to learn from the haters, right? What's not going on. And then use that as fuel to do better. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Oh, yeah. Ooh. Sorry about that. Burgundy behind. Yes.
Calvin is like many institutions, is very geographically based, right? West Michigan has its own culture and heritage, which is predominantly Dutch and Christian Reformed. How do you kind of balance a tradition and heritage of an institution with a desire for diversity that is different than the context that we find it?
One of the first places to start is having that dominant culture actually recognize that it is a culture, that it is a culture, and that there are values and there are beliefs that they might not even see, right? So when it still makes me laugh sometimes when I'm sitting with new students, and students will say, I knew Calvin was predominantly white, but I didn't know it was Dutch white, right? And there is a difference. But the Dutch whites don't actually see what that is. But if you're from the outside, so you could be a white Southern Baptist and you can still see it as soon, give it a couple of weeks, you'll be able to see it and to name it. But the people who are here, and that's part of their tradition or their orientation, they don't see it. So the first step is owning it, and then being able to create a narrative where diversity is adding to who you are and not a threat to who you are. If it's viewed as a threat, that's why one of those why diversity efforts fail points is fear of change. If we let too many of them in, right? If we let too many of those Pentecostals in, who are we? If we let too many of the urban core in, who will we be? If we let too many of the rural, Pell eligible people in, who will we be? If we let too many of the, if we let too many of the people who are the LGBTQA continuum, who will we be? One of the questions that we've had to ask ourselves recently at Calvin is if we let too many of the intellectually challenged people in, who will we be? Right? Because if we are the go-to place, because they have such a great experience here, our Ready to Life program, will the people who are not developmentally challenged think that we're not a seriously intellectual place? That's what I mean in asking the question about who are you and what does diversity look like on your campus. It's not just racial and ethnic diversity. It's all these ways in which we can be different from one another, and really asking the question with all these different, we call it diversity lenses, all these different lenses, is this category people included? Is this category people included? What would happen if we had more of them, right? What would happen? Would you still be the same institution? When you can answer the question, yes, we will still be. What was helpful, I think, here at Calvin is that I champion our Reformed identity, even though I did not come to the university as from the Reformed tradition. I was someone who could see the benefits, the good in the Reformed tradition when it comes to intellectual pursuits, the value in education, the freedom to study, the seriousness in which we took the mind and the intellect. That's the good of it. So I'm a champion for the Reform Project. I am a project, and I think that was helpful for some people to see me championing the Reformed identity so that people could feel, okay, we can have more of them and still keep our Reformed accent. But then it also begs the question, what do we mean by being Reformed? And now we're asking the question, what does it mean to be globally Reformed and not just the corner of Burton and the Beltline reform, right? That's the question before us now. And for some, the words are exciting. Global campus, globally reformed. It's so exciting until you start thinking about, well, that means we have to listen to the Nigerians. We have to listen to the South Koreans and maybe incorporate their studies, their research into our class readings and inform our understanding of what it means. Then it gets then you know what you're holding on so tightly to. And then you have to ask yourself, is it tradition? Is it fear? Or is this really what God is calling you to? And you can't grab hold of the new as long as you're holding on so tightly to what has always been. Is that helpful? Okay, I think, unless there was, that's it, going once, going twice. All right, thank you.